Welcome to Law Talk with Peter Meyer.
Hello and welcome to Law Talk with Peter Meyer. Peter provides personalized and professional representation for personal injury and wrongful death cases across Georgia, empowering injured individuals to recover financially and hold those responsible accountable. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're going to talk about TBIs, or traumatic brain injuries, how they differ from other personal injury claims. We're also going to talk about dealing with pre-existing conditions and how that applies to cases as well. Peter, welcome back. Great to see you.
Hey, Kevin. It's nice to be here.
All right, so we're talking about traumatic brain injuries. Let's start by going over some of the most common causes of TBIs in the personal injury cases that you've handled.
First, I just would like to define the term traumatic brain injury, because not everybody might realize what it is. And we've had cases where they never even heard the term until somebody in the family had an accident. So, essentially it's injury to the brain, and it can be from direct trauma, obviously like hitting your head on the windshield, or any violent head movement. Sometimes when you don't even hit your head, just the violent whiplash movement has caused traumatic brain injury, because your brain is essentially floating in cerebrospinal fluid, and the inside of your skull is not smooth. It's got these bony protuberances, and just that whipping motion can basically bruise your brain, or worse, just from hitting the inside of your skull, sometimes front and back or side to side. And that can, cause bruising or tearing of brain tissue or blood vessels.
Scary stuff. What are the unique challenges that come with, handling a case where a TBI is involved?
Well, we see it mostly in car accidents, where somebody hits their head, or also where they have a violent movement of the head, like going from 40 or 50 miles an hour to zero in a split second. And the more obvious cases are the ones where you have an MRI or CT scan that shows a bleed on the brain, and there's surgical intervention, and you can see it on the imaging. But what's more common is you have a more subtle head injury where there may not be a bleed on the brain. Sometimes you can see some contusion. Sometimes you don't see anything on there, but they're showing symptoms such as headaches that are persisting for weeks on end, anxiety, depression, loss of motor skills, diminished ability to concentrate. You've seen personality changes, and there's other symptoms, but these can be temporary or they can be lifelong. And the more challenging cases are those ones where you do not have subarachnoid tumor. I apologize. A subarachnoid bleed, or a subdural hematoma. The more challenging cases are the ones where there's some subtle bruising of the brain tissue, and they come into our office, and the spouse says, ever since this happened, he's not the same man. He just can't concentrate. He can't focus. He's irritable. And those are the tougher cases to prove.
Yeah. Is it difficult? Because, you mentioned at the beginning that a lot of people don't even know what that term means, traumatic brain injury. And those of us who are sports fans have seen plenty of attention put onto, head injuries and things like that. And it's definitely becoming more, there's more awareness about it, but there's still a lot of confusion and people don't understand what it is. So when there's not immediately visible symptoms, how do you go about advocating for clients in order to get them the compensation that they deserve?
Well, that is the challenge with these cases. And I'm glad you brought up the sports, because of the issues in football and other sports with the awareness of concussions, and what you see happens to these athletes after playing even just college ball for a few years.
Yep.
There's much more awareness to the injuries that can happen when you don't have anything showing up on imaging. And so in those cases, the first thing we start with is the family. And I'll give you the example of a client who was in his 40s. This was one of the first cases that I handled years ago. As a matter of fact, I found an old exhibit that we used at trial. The family came in, and he was having headaches. He was, and they said, my husband is not the same person. He's moody. He was always like, he was an engineer type, and he's just not good at math. He's being erratic and illogical, and and he's having depression, and it seems like his whole personality changed. And the only way medically to prove that is first you do the imaging, and they'll do a CT scan or MRI of the brain, and then in a case like that, you have to rely on expert witnesses. So you get a neurologist and a neuropsychologist to run a whole battery of tests, and that's how they diagnose those.
Interesting. So how do you relay that to the jury just through the experts? Because that can get very technical.
Well, what we do is there's two parts to that. You start with the family and close friends and coworkers of the injured party, and you get a description of he or she was like this all the years I knew them. And then after this accident, they could no longer focus or concentrate. They were having balance issues, having constant headaches, things like that, blurred vision. And then you go to the next step and you have to have an expert witness. So what you do is you have the neurologist or the physician will send them to a neuropsychologist. And the neuropsychologist they're trained in knowing which parts of the brain control which functions. So they will do a whole battery of tests, and we'll also talk to the family, and they'll look at what exactly the issues, whether it's balance or memory loss or personality changes. And by knowing which parts of the brain affect those different functions, they can determine the type of, the part of the brain that's damaged. And then to prove the case, like the one I used as example with that man in his 40s, you look at the accident and he had a front to back whiplash motion. And so the neuropsychologist putting that all together said there was damage on the frontal lobe, and that accounted for certain things because they know which parts of the brain control which functions. So you need friends, family, coworkers, but you cannot win a case without a neurologist and a neuropsychologist.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like you said, there's nothing to point to without them.
Yes,
there's
exactly.
Yeah. That makes sense. So with insurance companies, obviously we've talked before about how they don't want to pay. That's not what they do. But do they take the severity of a TBI seriously as a general rule?
Unless you have, bleeding on the brain, subdural hematoma, something that shows up very clearly on imaging, they're always going to be skeptical of that. And that's why it's really essential to have this reviewed by the best neurologist and the best neuropsychologist and other experts that you can, because they're the only ones that can truly explain. It's a very extensive process that includes lots of testing of different capabilities, cognitive and physical and so forth, and emotional. And that's the only way you can prove to an insurance company this type of injury.
When it comes to the actual compensation, I mean, a really bad TBI could be a lifelong situation where you need lifelong care. The person who may have caused this accident might only have minimum coverage. So how can you ensure that your client is taken care of in those situations?
Well, these cases can end up having long-term care necessary. It depends on what type of rehabilitation that they require. They may require speech therapy, cognitive therapy. That can take a long time and can be very expensive. And you're right, not everybody has proper coverage. And I do not go a single day without telling everybody who I speak to, you need to get uninsured motorist coverage, because it covers somebody who's uninsured, but also somebody who does not have enough insurance. So that fault party may not have enough, but if you have enough on coverage to add on top of that, then that's where you would recover the rest of the damages.
Okay. Obviously, sometimes these symptoms don't show up right away either. It can take a while. So do you recommend clients go to the hospital, get checked out, go to their urgent care, even if their symptoms are mild or even minimal?
100%. Medically and legally, that's necessary. If you hit your head having any type of headache or any type of symptom, you should go get checked out. Otherwise, it could be life-threatening. There have been cases where there was a subtle bleed on the brain that was not diagnosed, and a few hours or a day can be the difference between life and death, or be the difference between being permanently disabled. And so it's important. And legally, it's important because we need to document exactly where you're hurting. Men are particularly bad at this. I'm the worst offender. We don't like to go to the doctor. We grow up, playing sports, and they say, walk it off, rub dirt on it. But if you're
Get
in
my
an
bell
accident,
rung, that's all.
yes, exactly. But if you're in an accident, that's not the time to ignore that or to put off any treatment. The insurance company will use everything against you, especially if you don't go for treatment right away, or if you have gaps in treatment, they will use that against you as well.
Yeah, not the time to be the tough guy. Right?
Exactly. I say that every day. I may not take that advice, but I give it to my clients.
Yeah, so do what I say, not do what I do.
Exactly.
Let's move on and talk about pre-existing conditions, because that obviously it plays into a lot of different situations, back injuries, whatever. But I feel like pre-existing conditions, obviously could be something that people might point to in a TBI case too. Can you just start by talking about how pre-existing conditions affect the ability to win a personal injury case?
This is probably the most argued over part of cases that we handle. Out of the thousands of cases that we have handled, we argue a lot more over pre-existing conditions versus who caused the accident. Insurance companies love pre-existing conditions. They love to say, yes, you're hurting, but that was not caused by the accident. We see that a lot, like with neck and back injuries. For example, everybody over the age of 30, 35 has some degenerative disc disease and arthritis in their spine. We all have it. If you run an image on anybody, it's going to show up. But if you have an accident and you go to the emergency room and the x-ray says degenerative cervical disc disease, the insurance company will say, pre-existing condition. But it doesn't mean anything, because if an accident aggravates a prior condition, then they're 100% responsible for that. And you can also have a pre-existing condition that's completely asymptomatic, meaning you have no symptoms whatsoever. And then you get hit in an accident, and then suddenly you're in agony. So it's something that we argue about every day here in this office. And I'd say, more than half of our cases, we're arguing over what's pre-existing versus what's new.
Do you have any examples of pre-existing cases or cases that involved pre-existing conditions?
More than I can count. But one blatant example is a case of a gentleman in his 50s. And through no fault of his own, he was in 3 different accidents over a period of 5 years, each time injuring his neck.
Oh my gosh.
He came to us for the last one. He ultimately had surgery at multiple levels. And the insurance company came in and said, oh, no, this is clearly not due to this accident, because people don't realize, first of all, if you have prior accidents, they have a database of all the accidents you have. Secondly, he clearly had arthritis in his neck. And so what we had to do in that case to prove that this accident aggravated what he had, plus caused a new injury on top of that, was testimony from him, his coworkers, his close family, and then his surgeon. And in this case, most importantly, we got the radiologist to testify. We held up the films. He had MRIs done before the accident. He had MRIs done after the accident. And we're able to show the difference, which, you're talking about millimeters here, or less than that in some cases, between pressing on a nerve and needing surgery and not pressing on a nerve. Mm-hmm. And we were able to show clearly where he had pressure on the nerve roots from this accident versus a year and a half before when he didn't. And the doctors plus you combine that with his symptoms, which in that case, you have what's called radiculopathy, where you have pain radiating down into your hand, or if it's your low back, down into your legs, and numbness and tingling in your hand. He had none of those symptoms. And the imaging showed clear pressure on a nerve root where his spinal cord was being pressed on and the nerve roots were being pressed on. So using the expert testimony plus his coworkers, family, and friends, we're able to clearly show that the accident caused a new injury and aggravated his old injury. And we won a very large verdict here in Bibb County, Georgia on that one. But the insurance company up to that point had denied it and offered him $0.
Wow. Interesting, man. I think if I had 3 accidents over 5 years where I actually hurt myself, I'd stop driving. I'd be like, I'm cursed. There's a hex on me.
I told him, I said, I am never carpooling with you because you have a target on your car. Unfortunately, I see that a lot. People are hit. There's a lot of bad drivers out there, and I've had people in multiple accidents, none of them their fault. And those are the ones that are challenging, because insurance companies love pre-existing conditions. And they love prior accidents. So that's why it's important to have a lawyer who specializes in injury cases, because we know where to get that evidence in order to win the case.
Combining our 2 topics here, do you find that insurance companies try to use pre-existing conditions when it comes to TBIs? Do they say, oh, you played football when you were young? You were in this accident? You did this? You fell off that? Do they try to do that?
100%. They will try to get your medical records of every time you've bumped your head, every accident you've ever had, and they will try to use it against you, and they will go back and get medical records of every time you had a headache. And then they'll just try to, muddy up the waters because they don't have to prove anything. We have the burden of proof. So pre-existing conditions in TBI cases are very important, especially if you have an older client. They'll just try to say it's age-related. So it's something we deal with every day. And once again, that's a reason why somebody needs to hire an experienced personal injury attorney to represent them. For
anyone listening who maybe, has some issues with the TBI based on an accident, what should they do? Should they, how quickly, should they go and get checked out, then call you or call a lawyer, or how should they handle the process? The most important thing before you even think about calling a lawyer is to go get checked out medically, to document your injuries and to make sure you get the proper treatment. Sometimes there's something serious going on. If it wasn't found in the ER, it could have been a lot worse. And so when somebody's in an accident, right away, get medical treatment, document the property damage, take photos of the scene if you can, get the other driver's insurance, and do not make any statements to the other insurance company until you've gotten legal advice. All right. Well, thanks for that, Peter. And thank you for tuning in to Law Talk with Peter Meyer. For more information or to connect with Peter and the team, visit meyerlawfirm.net. And don't forget to like our video and subscribe. We got lots more information coming your way. Peter, always great seeing you. Thanks so much for your time. Thank you, Kevin. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.